Tell me about a time when it was an unexpected situation that actually went really well.
There was, Logan, Paul, and Dunkin' Donuts. I learned how to work with influencers because Rob Dyrdek used to yell at me on the phone every week.
Welcome to the Instagram Stories podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hill. If this is your first time listening or watching, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Here's how this works. I sit down with people who are knowledgeable about social media, and I get them to share stories, talk about their learnings and the strategies that they implement in about 20 to 30 minutes. I get them to share the secrets, the things they would only tell their friends, and you get to benefit from their knowledge. If you like this kind of content, I host the Instagram Stories social media news 3 times a week, which is short 8 to 10 minute episodes where I find clips from people who work at the social media platforms. I include those clips in the show, and I explain the context, why they're relevant, and how they can help you to grow your following. I feature clips from the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Instagram, Adam Mosseri, and the CEO of TikTok, Shou Chew. Sometimes I can even find clips from the CEO of Snapchat, Evan Spiegel, or other important people in the industry, and I include those in the show. If you have time and you are interested in staying up to date on social media news, check out the Instagram Stories social media news wherever you get podcasts. If you like this kind of content and you enjoy the interviews that I do, please go on Apple Podcasts and leave a review of the show. It only takes a minute, it doesn't cost you anything, and it helps other people to find the show. The link to leave a review is in the show notes. You can find it. It will say leave a review, and you can click it to go directly to the best place to leave the review. All right, today's interview is with Shawn Kallet. Let's get into the interview. Today we're here with Shawn Kallet from 203 Creates. Shawn, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Shawn, for people who are not familiar with you, can you tell us who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So I co-founded a company recently called 203 Creates, which is a boutique media marketing and content agency for brands with stories to tell. And my background before doing that is, over 20 years in media entertainment. I started at major media companies. The first 10 years of my career were largely spent at Comedy Central and MTV, with a little stint as a media buyer in there, but all coming up the sales side. So I was selling MTV media and shows and events back in 2006 to 2011, at a time when YouTube and Facebook were just launching, and reality stars were getting their first social media platform presence. And I was just really fortunate, I think, to come up in a place at a time that would be so critical to the rest of my career and the exposure that I got there. Back in 2013, I left NBC News and joined a little talent management company called Collective, which at the time they represented some of the biggest digital stars, Rhett and Link, Lucas Cruikshank, a number of big creators, as well as traditional music acts and artists. I remember our first 6 months, a lot of the status meetings were about Linkin Park's upcoming tour, right? But over time, and I was there for about 4+ years, the business grew from Collective to Collective Digital Studio to Studio 71, which is still one of the top multi-channel networks and YouTube creator companies in the space today. And, we could talk more about my background there, but from Studio 71, I was hooked on the creator space and working with influencers and helping brands develop partnerships with influencers. And so for the last, 12 years or so now, have really been focused on, creator content, influencer partnerships, branded entertainment, working at a number of agencies and starting my own company, back in 2019, called Deepwater Strategies. And, for the last 7 years, I've been a consultant, an advisor, a digital studio leader, and now really focused on helping brands, creators, and media companies develop content strategies and ways to monetize that content for commercial gain.
Okay. It's a lot there. Obviously, you have a huge amount of experience. Can you talk about some of those stories from the early days when you were first getting your involvement in a world that's obviously changed so much over the time you've been in this industry. But can you tell us some of those stories from the early days?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I was so lucky to be at Comedy Central and be at MTV in the early and mid 2000s when I was. That was really where the modern creator economy started. And it was with TV stars who had a Facebook page. You know, so very early on, and first just being exposed to talent was really beneficial. When I was a sales assistant at Comedy Central, we would go to company happy hours with Aziz Ansari and, you know, Dave Chappelle's writing team and, you know, executives from South Park, because it was just the type of culture that mingled, you know, sales and marketing and programming and production, you know, all as a group. And so I got very comfortable very early on dealing with brands and dealing with creators and shows. So it was super fortunate to start there. And, you know, it was really in my time at MTV where, you know, Facebook launched, YouTube launched, and we were selling, you know, television integrations and media sponsorships and, you know, custom content across all screens. And I always like to joke now, like when I got later into the influencer space full time, people asked, you know, how did you know how to do this? And really, it was because of my experience as the sales liaison at MTV, working with Rob Dyrdek's shows in 2010 and the early part of 2011. Right? And I always joke that, you know, I learned how to work with influencers because Rob Dyrdek used to yell at me on the phone every week. And, you know, he talks about it now all the time in his podcasts and his, you know, content that he creates, that he was one of the first to figure out how to commercialize his airtime and his content on MTV. You know, MTV was getting ratings and audience. Rob was getting a platform for his personal brand deals. And he was writing the contracts with those brand partners that would guarantee them the exposure in the MTV shows. And here I was, you know, the sales guy who was coming to these weekly production meetings with a list of needs from the various sales teams and our brand partners. And I don't fault him for it because he was protecting his deals. But it was early on in the days of doing these types of branded integrations. And, you know, I just got used to him like yelling when he wasn't happy with how things were going. And Rob's a great guy. Like I've since gotten to work with the team that worked on Ridiculousness in later roles. And, you know, it was just one of those funny things of like going back to my boss and saying like, Rob really didn't like that deal, or he didn't, you know, his team doesn't want to do this. And you just kind of learn, you know, A, how to position things to talent, and B, you know, how to just kind of take some punches, but make sure that, you know, I was doing my job by just sharing updates and kind of giving feedback. So, you know, that was a really like key period for me. It was kind of getting to work with talent and really understanding how they think about, you know, commercializing content, right? You know, I think there's a bunch of stories that I could tell about MTV, but if I just fast forward a little bit, when I started at Collective Digital Studio in 2013, it was funny because a lot of the creators that we worked with there, you know, idolized Rob, and they looked at him as a role model. So it was very much, you know, comforting for me to know, okay, well, they want to work like television stars who are commercializing their content. You know, I would go to brands and agencies and pitch them on this idea of, hey, this is everything you asked me for when I was working at MTV or NBC News without the $5 million minimum commitment in media to go along with it. And, you know, back then in 2014, like brands and agencies didn't know how to buy it, right? You know, I had a lot of friends who I'd worked with on the brand and agency side for years who, when I went to pitch them YouTube creators, loved the idea, but a lot of them were saying things like, wow, like there's YouTubers who are making content and I can buy it. So I eventually like came up with a thought leadership deck back in 2014 that it was really 4 slides. It was, what's an influencer? You know, who should I work with? You know, what are the outcomes and how do we scale? And I think to this day, you know, most of the industry has caught up and doesn't need to be convinced anymore that they should work with influencers, but they still need to understand how and who and, you know, how to measure it. And, you know, now we're getting to a place industry-wide where it's about scale, but it's about scaling with the right process and systems to be able to do it repeatedly, which, 10, 12 years ago, like there was no reason for brands or agencies to keep working with the same influencers or even the same companies, right? Like when I was at Studio 71, we were competing for brand partnerships with Fullscreen and Maker and Defy and Me Too and Endemol Shine. And, at the time, brands were just testing the waters with creators. So they would allocate, 50 grand or 150 grand for an entire year's budget. And that would just be a test with one company. And maybe it went well and they would look at the recap and say, great, like let's talk next year, or it didn't go well. And they would say, sorry, like we're going to try with another company. And, you had to figure out like how to get through a lot of that. So early on, I realized, we needed A, kind of stickier, offerings and solutions, and B, measurement to go along with it. So from very early on at, Collective and Studio 71, a lot of what I was doing was just evangelizing to brands and agencies that they should work with creators and trying to get RFPs and, proactive proposals so that I could show them, here's what this looks like. Here are the ideas. Here's the media distribution. Here are the measurement solutions. And, it was interesting. I mean, yeah.
I was going to ask, when did you see it start to shift from we want to work with this influencer one time, we have a small budget, to, okay, let's build a relationship with this creator influencer so that we can keep working with them because we're seeing success? How did you see that change?
It was typically, this is a little generic, but typically the cycle would go, we're going to do a small deal first. If it goes well, let's look at next quarter or let's start planning for next year. And if that goes well, okay, now let's think about influencer as a media channel, right? Like I remember the first time a brand marketer told me that they were adding a budget line for influencers in their overall media strategy. It was Clearasil in 2015. And we had done a campaign. The first deal that I did at Collective Studio 71 was with Clearasil, and they wanted to promote to teenagers that Clearasil was, their acne solution. And so we developed a partnership with 4 influencers. There was Vitaly Z, who was a big prankster, Lucas Crickshank, who had played Fred as a character but was on his own at the time, a creator. There was, oh my God, the other 2 are escaping me. Wasabi, a team of, 2 creators who have since split up, but Wasabi was what would now be like a YA comedy channel, right? And they all created amazing videos for Clearasil. Oh, and Rhett and Link were the other creators, Good Mythical Morning. So all 4 of these creators made amazing videos, and the brands loved it. And they saw a lot of organic traffic. And, it was not just great for the media agency that I worked with and Clearasil as a brand, but the Google team that worked with them, was really excited about it because it got the brand spending more, money and thinking about YouTube in a different way. And it was following that campaign that the brand manager at the time told me, they had seen such success, a good, brand awareness lift that, 2015 into 2016, they were adding it as a dedicated line to their budget.
It must have been very rewarding to see something that started from something very small to being part of the way a company thinks about media and spending going forward.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was a good one. I'd say even better one from around then was with Church and Dwight, and their agency at the time was Maxis, which has since changed names, but is still part of WPP. And, the first year that I worked with Church and Dwight, it was on their Batiste dry shampoo and Nair hair remover. And Batiste was a brand new to the U.S., and, we had an incredibly successful campaign. 7 influencers went to the Billboard Music Awards, walked the red carpet thanks to the brand, did their Get Ready With Me videos beforehand, posted all over, at the time, Twitter and Instagram and Snap. And, over 3 years where I had worked with them, year after year, that was one where the client actually told me that, within 4 years of launching in the US, and largely because of the influencer content, the brand grew to about 9 figures in revenue.
Wow.
Yeah.
Have there been some where you set everything up for success? It seemed like it was going to work and then it didn't for whatever reason, factors in your control or outside of your control?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think one that we had talked about earlier was, Logan Paul and Dunkin' Donuts. And so Dunkin' Donuts was one of a number of brands where I was able to work with them to develop their first social influencer partnerships. And in 2014, 2015, Logan Paul was already big on YouTube and, Instagram, and that was growing, but he was the biggest star on Snap and the biggest star on Vine. And Dunkin', targeting the teen and, young adult audience, wanted to work with Logan to create Snap content and Vine content and social content that was going to, hit home to drive adoption of first Dunkin's new mobile app, which back in 2015, it's amazing how many mobile app campaigns we did. But we did a really cool integration where they not only sponsored Logan's content, we did a series of custom executions, but they made a virtual gift card in the Dunkin' Donuts app featuring Logan Paul.
Oh.
And I believe it sold out about 500,000 units in, the first kind of window of the campaign. So they very quickly came back and we planned a second campaign. And this was at a time in 2016, I believe, when mainstream media was just starting to pick up on influencers. And we had developed this campaign idea where, kind of like an amazing race, Logan was going to race all over New York City live on Snapchat, going to different Dunkin' Donuts, using transportation as dictated by his fans on Snap.
So kind of choose your own adventure, but the people watching are making the choices.
Yep.
I remember at the time, this was a very novel concept. Now it kind of seems a little bit...
It does, right?
Like, okay, we've done that before. But yeah, at the time, it was brand new.
At the time, it was brand new. Yeah. And the day started out with an empty box of Dunkin', right? And the goal was to go to 12 locations in the city to fill the box with donuts that his fans would choose. So really, really cool idea.
Sounds fun. Yeah.
It was fun. Yeah. It was a lot of fun. A couple days before the shoot, we found out that 60 Minutes was going to follow us around. And it was the first time that 60 Minutes was doing a segment on influencers. Creatively, the segment was called The Influencers. And it was wild because we didn't have the brand with us for the whole day, but we had this film crew or, news crew following us around. And we were doing things like, taking a rickshaw from Central Park to, Columbus Circle, and taking the subway and taking the, a water taxi, or taking, the ferry or the bus, or walking or biking or hitchhiking. I mean, he was trying to do, everything he could think of.
It sounds fun, but also with the logistics of having, you're trying to make content and there's someone following you making content about you making the content. That sounds like way too many pieces moving to track everything. Yeah.
It was a lot. And not only that, like while they are, interviewing Logan's manager and Logan, and they're like talking about how the deal came together, I was the brand partnerships director on it, and I'm worried that the brand is going to get upset of how they're talking about the deal and they're not there. And so, yeah, it was a stressful day, but it was a lot of fun. The challenge part of it, and apologies to anyone from Dunkin' if this is, it's all old news now, but what I didn't know at the time was that one of the elements that Dunkin' had bought on was an actual 60-second Facebook video, which was going to be the recap and kind of highlight from the day. And obviously I did the deal, so I knew that we were doing Facebook video, but we had pitched the deal in, say, March, and then we were shooting it in June. And in that period, Logan had rightfully noticed that Facebook's algorithm was favoring shorter content. So what originally started as a pitch, including a 60-second video, first, the day of the shoot, Logan shows up and says, look, guys, 60 seconds isn't going to work on Facebook right now. Let's make this a really strong 30. I said, okay, let me go talk to the brand. And talk to the brand, and it's like, well, we hear that, but, it got bought up the ladder as a 60 because that's what they knew, from TV. Yeah. So I spent, really 48 hours the shoot and then the next day editing, trying to figure out, like, can we actually make a 60, or was Logan just hard and fast no? And, to his credit, it was a hard and fast no, and he was right. That Facebook video ended up doing millions and millions of views, and the brand got a ton of value out of it. But in the end, it was a lesson in, communication. It was unbeknownst to me that was a key selling point internally, was that it would be a 60-second piece of content. And so when we came back and said, hey, just kidding, it's actually 30, they wanted to make good. They wanted to know what else we were going to do. And, it's just one of those things that now you would look at it and say, okay, first, the lessons I've learned from that are, like, don't plan any elements without the brand understanding that things could change, because, platforms are living and breathing things. Sure. And in the end of the, campaign, like, you want to focus on the KPIs, you want to focus on the goals.
Right. What is the outcome?
The actual business goals. Right. And so they wanted views, they wanted relevancy, they wanted buzz. They got that like crazy. I think eventually it became okay when they saw all of that it was a 30 and not a 60, because we had done this amazing, snap execution, and the Vine and the Instagram and all of that went with it. But that was tough as a partnerships director, because, there were really like no layers in between me and Logan. Right. And, if you're at MTV or NBC News, there's integrated marketing and production and programming and talent relations and all of these people whose job it is to kind of translate between, different needs. And in the creator space, which I still think is the best way to do it, you're close to the creators, but that means like you're working directly with them. And, I've had a number of times, whether it's with a creator in an agency or creator in a brand, or even the agency and the brand, disagreeing about something. And there's no right answer. A lot of the times it's subjective. And so you're just trying to find the happy medium, subjective. Right?
Yeah, of course. Oh.
Trying to find that happy medium. Like, oh, I want you to authentically say our talking points just like this, right? And the creator will go, well, that's not authentic.
Right. That's not how I actually talk. Yeah.
That's not how I actually talk. So the Logan one, that first of all, he knew what he wanted as a creator very early on. And I remember that day, talking with him in Central Park about what his plans for the future were. And he had a vision in his head all those years ago about being, an entertainer and a superstar, and, really like leveraging social media in a way that he saw fans responding to. I think he still does that among the best in the world to this day.
Yeah. How would you say, in terms of all those lessons that you've learned, the various situations that you've been in, how do you help your clients and companies and brands that you work with today based off those lessons that you've learned?
It's a great question. I think I've shifted from, over the years, focusing on the great creative idea to focusing on the systems and the process and the way to measure the outcomes of great creative ideas, to know that everyone's going to be happy because we're focused on the right goals. So instead of pitching one-offs and saying, hey, we've got this video idea, right, which used to work. 10 years ago, if you were a brand, you could integrate in one YouTube video and sell out at Best Buy or Bed Bath & Beyond or Nordstrom's nationwide. Now there's so much more content out there, and it's so much harder for that to rise above the noise. You really need integrated systems to understand, how are we discovering the right creators? How are we testing with a kind of low risk approach to start with, and then who's really responding, both in terms of the creators themselves and the audience, to what the brand is trying to do, and, going forward with those creators in a bigger way. So a real phased approach, a crawl, walk, run, to see, is this a fit creatively and audience overlap wise? Do we have ideas that jive between the brand and the creator of what they want to do, that the brand could really help the creator level up their content, right? Go on a trip. I mean, now you see brand trips are almost passé, but back then, it was really special to get an extra, production budget from a brand, because then the creator could say, oh, I've always wanted to go on tour, or I've always wanted to, blow up a car, or whatever it is. Like, I've always wanted to do this series. And, the greatest partnerships come out of those conversations where a creator is a fan of a brand is a fan of creator. The brand provides the budget and the goals to let the creator do something special for their fans. To me, that's the most fun way to win.
I love that. You've talked about so many things that were very new and exciting at the time, but are now kind of passé because we've seen them already. So 2026, 2027, what would you say are the new approaches or new ideas that people might start thinking about now to either work with creators if they already do, or to start working with creators if they never have before?
It's a great setup. I will say I will cut to the chase on the answer, which I think is the bridge that most brands need to cross. And that is working with creators to develop content for their own YouTube channels, right? So nobody needs to be convinced anymore that they should advertise on YouTube. Nobody needs to be convinced anymore that they should work with influencers or content creators. But the challenge for brands is looking at their own channels and coming up with a programming strategy that features creators on platforms like YouTube or TikTok or Facebook, and thinking like a programmer who wants to attract an audience. That's what creators do, right? As you well know, right? It's you come up with an insight, you define your purpose, you think about your content pillars, you think about, okay, who am I really talking to? Where are they consuming this content? How am I going to reach them? How am I going to retain them once I reach them? Why are they going to keep coming back?
Yes. Why do they care about what
Why
I'm
do
doing?
they care? Exactly. And how do I reward them for caring, right? How do I give them more? So those are all the things that creators think about every day. Brands think about P&Ls and customer acquisition costs and, moving
Spreadsheets
product.
of
right.
course.
And spreadsheets, it's interesting. Mark Husted, who was Mr. Beast's manager and has been a long time, pillar in the creator economy, said something on stage at VidCon in 2024, which I almost jumped out of my seat because it was so on point. And he said, looking at Mr. Beast's business, as a creative business, you cannot run it from a spreadsheet. It has to be about taste and timing and trends and jumping on things early because you see an opportunity. And, the spreadsheet of it all says, don't do this unless there's this return, right? So I think one of the big differences today from 10 years ago is not only do we have the data and the models to be able to project how things are going to do, but we have the learnings and the insights to know once you're in the vicinity of making smart decisions based on the data, you don't need to stick to the spreadsheet. You need to trust the creator's instincts on what they think is going to work best for their audience.
Right. And that's a great point because that first mover advantage is so important. And we know now creating content, even if it doesn't seem like it has an ROI upfront, but if you put the right pieces in place and you add creativity on top of it, there's a great opportunity there if you can capitalize on it properly.
That's right.
And that's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll give you another example. This is, from I think 2016. I worked with Nat Geo when they wanted to promote their limited series, which was a big event at the time called Mars. And Nat Geo was working with NASA. They had scientists and astronauts who were in a Mars simulated environment out in the desert in, I want to say, New Mexico or Arizona. And they had these astronauts that had been living in this Mars habitat for months. And they wanted to find ways to work with influencers to promote the launch of the show, which was going to start with, the astronauts are coming out of the habitat, and then the docuseries,
sounds like a good premise. Sounds like a great setup.
Super cool. So I didn't even work with them directly at the time, but the brand was really interested in Vsauce. And I knew their manager at WME from working with him on other creators. And so we were able to collaborate, and I worked with all 3 Vsauce creators to make content for the show Mars that came out the day that the show was premiering. And as you talk about the creativity and talk about the challenges, one of the most challenging things in creating content between brands and creators is when the brand is IP. Because the brand wants their IP to look and seem a certain way.
Yes.
And when you're integrating content with content, everyone's got that subjective opinion, and rightfully so, right? So in that process of working with three of the biggest creators in the world, probably still to this day,
Plus
and
NASA, plus Nat Geo.
plus Nat Geo,
Yeah.
who's one of the most respected, creative brands in the world, there were a lot of conversations about like what footage was being used and was it official or B-roll or where was it going to end up or how are the three different creators going to talk about the same thing from different angles. And in the end, lots of back and forth on all of these elements, including logo placements and fonts and, everything you can imagine over a period of months. Well, the Vsauce guys launched all three of their videos at the exact same moment. It was the afternoon of the day of the show premiere. And all three videos hit YouTube's trending tab that afternoon.
That's amazing.
And Nat Geo's Mars premiered that night and won its demo in the time slot.
That's fantastic.
And they were super excited about
sure,
that.
yeah.
Those three videos from Vsauce, I think today probably have over 20 million lifetime views.
That's incredible.
And if you never even watched the show, you watch those videos and now you have a really good understanding of the habitat of Mars.
That is a perfect example of demonstrating what the collaborative effect can be and how that can influence. I haven't watched the Mars show. What is it? Is it good? Is it worth watching?
It was great. Okay. It was sci-fi, but docu-style.
Right.
And it was 10 years ago now, and I think it would still hold up to this day.
I'll definitely have to check that out. Definitely have to watch that. Shawn, this has been great having you on. Thank you so much for your time. Can you tell us what you're going to be creating in the near future and where we can follow along on your journey?
Yeah, totally. So right now I manage a Trivia for Kids I manage a podcast called Trivia for Kids. Trivia for Kids is one of Apple's top shows in the education for kids category. And thanks to the Spotify Wrapped for Creators in 2025, we learned that Trivia for Kids is in the top 1% of all podcasts on Spotify for time spent listening, comments, and shares.
That's incredible.
It was a really big boost because Spotify doesn't share a lot of data with respect to the kids and family space.
Okay.
Kids and family is a very, very challenging market in podcasting, especially due to lack of measurement showing that brands are actually reaching parents. Brands don't want to reach just kids, right? So this year is really focused on growing the Trivia for Kids show from the audio side. And we're currently in development on an unscripted project that would bring the Trivia for Kids show to YouTube in a new way and bring creators and their families into the show. And I'm really excited. The production team that we're working with on that is from Amazon and Hello Sunshine, and got some big plans that I hope to be talking more about in the next couple of months. But we're right now planning for a launch of the unscripted show on YouTube and Kadoodle, and then working on a format for streaming as well.
I will include links for all of those in the show notes so that people can check them out.
Yeah, thank you. And I feel like I could go on and on, so I'll try and limit it. But the other one that I'm actually two things that I'm really excited about, along with Trivia for Kids, I manage YouTube and all of social media for a brand and entertainment celebrity interview show called Grave Conversations. And Grave Conversations is hosted by David Dasmalchian, who's in Murderbot and The Dark Knight and Street Fighter coming out, and he's an incredible actor. And the show is sponsored by Titan Caskets, which is a direct consumer casket company.
Interesting.
And they have had a big push over the last few years from earned media and branded entertainment. So they decided to make this show, Grave Conversations, with David Dasmalchian and Alon Gale, who's their creative director and one of the creators of The Bachelor and F-Boy Island, and has a really prolific film development arm called Quagmire Films. And each week, David interviews a guest while they're lying in caskets. And so picture like this setup right here.
That's a very interesting twist.
But lying flat on your back, staring up,
ceiling.
not looking at the other person. And they get into these really, deep and meaningful and fun conversations, about life and death and Hollywood and everything in between.
That is a fascinating concept.
It's a really cool show. And there are it's a great team to work with. I really appreciate being able to work with them. And, I'm helping them grow on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. And we're excited. It's 1 year in. February 2026 was the most views in a month the brand has ever had on YouTube. And we're growing really fast on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So all good things there. And there's a lot of new episodes coming for Grave Conversations throughout this year.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I have a bunch of other projects in development, a hockey podcast that I'm working on, a couple of consulting projects with other YouTube operators to streamline, growing podcasts into video shows, which I think is really big. And, the last thing that I'm really excited about this year are microdramas. And
those are really, I will say, not my personal interest, but those do seem to be doing really well.
Yeah. I mean, the microdrama phenomenon, I will say, over the last 18 months has been interesting in that it's unlocked a couple of new ideas. One being, and if you're not familiar with microdramas, I would think of them as gamified soap operas shot vertically for watching on the phone in bite-sized episodes.
That's a great description. Yes.
Thank you. So imagine like a 75-minute movie broken up into 60-second episodes. And the business model of the microdrama platforms is to allow users to watch the first 10 to 15 episodes for free, but then they have to pay to watch the rest. And they could either subscribe for a monthly fee or buy virtual coins in a transactional model.
Oh.
And so they're driving a lot of revenue from these scripted soap opera style stories. But what's potentially more interesting now is the two ideas that it's really proving out are that audiences will watch scripted content on their phones in short form.
In bite-sized pieces.
And you can break out of that scripted format because audiences will pay for compelling content in a transactional model. You can go unscripted, you can go comedy, you could go gaming. There are a lot of things now that talking with producers and brands and media companies about like how to take that model of transactional short form content and apply it to these other genres.
Do you think that will eventually be a 50-50 split for large format, lean back kind of viewing experiences? And I say that because me personally, if it's a long multi-part video like that, I would rather sit on my couch, watch it on the big screen TV, and be able to relax a little bit as opposed to staring at my phone. How do you kind of see that playing out in 2026?
I think the platforms are heavily incentivized to make it happen. So you'll see this year, Instagram's new app for TV is growing in distribution.
Yeah.
That's something that you could see really growing. TikTok with their, desire to be on more big screens, see that growing. I'll give you a bold prediction, right? I don't think this is going to change the world, but I do think if the vertical format continues to take off, there's no reason your TV can't be vertical.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
and I have a TikTok app on my TV, and sometimes I watch it. It's vertical. It's not perfect, but after a minute or two, you don't notice. But yes, I do think, though, if you have so much screen, it should be filled.
Yes.
And YouTube on televisions works, right? We've seen how YouTube on TV has performed better than I think all the other streaming apps combined. And so I think that's why I look at it from the lens of people do want to have a lean back experience for a full screen window. But at the end of the day, right, if the content is so engrossing that you are just desperate to keep watching and seeing what happens, it doesn't matter what format or what screen or how it looks, as long as you can keep enjoying the content. So
that's right. And the idea of, a vertical strip in a horizontal TV with black bars is over. Like, forget those black bars. You put a chat up there on one side,
Yes.
you put a QR code
Yes.
and brand content on the other side.
If there's conversation,
you fill the space.
And I'm reading what people are thinking about the video as I'm watching the video, yes, that will absolutely make up for the fact that the screen is not fully across. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's for sure. So yeah, that's a lot of what I have going on this year. Really excited as we build 203 Creates to be a solution for brands with stories to tell, and happy to talk to any creators or creator companies that are trying to figure out new monetization and growth strategies.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you so much for your time being on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's get it. your first pick and you're glad your post got seen. Your friends liked it too, but what you didn't know is what posting on that platform would do. Taking all your time and attention, doom scrolling. Also, let me mention, you gotta post on every platform, putting content on every set just to conform. Likes gave you validation and you got hooked. Now engagement is down, you feeling overlooked. Hey, keep coming back for more podcasts. And find me on Instagram at Daniel Hill Media. I'm gone.
So tell me about a time when it was an unexpected situation that actually went really well.
I love that question. So there was another show from another network that I worked on around the same time, 2015, 2016. Sci-Fi Network had a show called Z Nation, which was ostensibly a zombie show. And they were coming out with season 2. Season 1 had gone well. They were looking for influencers to help promote season 2. And we, at the time, I was with Studio 71, worked with a number of big sci-fi VFX creators. And out of the creators that we presented to the brand, Sci-Fi and their media agency chose to work with a creator called Mr. TV Cow. Mr. TV Cow is a Russian VFX special effects creator who was part of our network at Studio 71, did not speak English. He was in Russia, probably still in Russia to this day. But his partner manager, John Carl, who's one of the best in the business working with talent and executing on brand deals, he communicated with Mr. TV Cow so effectively about what the brand wanted, right, that we started the partnership off in a really good way from a creative standpoint. The brand had very specific ideas when they started the RFP process of what they wanted the creative to be, right? It had to have their messaging and had to have their look and feel. And, it was a zombie show, so they wanted it to, be a specific way. Mr. TV Cow submitted his first draft of story ideas, and we sent along some of his recent videos to show them what his style was. And I'll never forget when the brand called back and said, we looked at his videos, we love his content, forget our brief.
Oh.
We want to give you the special effects eye look so that he can incorporate our zombie eyes into whatever he wants to make.
That's incredible.
And what he made was a battle video called Cats vs. Zombies. And I still have no idea how he did this, but it was live action and it was zombies attacking cats. And the cats were defending their home and the cats had heavy machine guns. The cats had, weapons and they were like in a zombie battle. The video did something like 200 million views on YouTube in the first month. Wow. It did 1 billion views on Facebook from all the pirated copies that we had to get taken down at the time. But it was, the unexpected twist of the brand looked at what the creator was doing. They loved his style and they said, forget all of these talking points. Just make us a video, use these zombie eyes and have a call to action that drives to the show.
I love that story because not only did they give him the creative freedom, but it paid off. It 100% paid off. That's amazing.
They won their demo that night for the premiere of season 2.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so that was a good one.